slavery and Christianity. Many try to judge the laws in the Bible by comparing it to the laws of today. I have no problem with that, as long they can name for me one law that we have been ordered to follow today, which does not fit with the human rights laws of today. What was made thousands of years ago was made appropriate for that period, in a time when all lived by the sword and died by it. The nation of Israel itself, the entire nation, was enslaved. It was the lifestyle at that time. They had to survive within it, but did not have to love it. At that time you did not have a lot of choices. Whether you did or did not like owning a slave, you might end up being one. For me, the teaching of Christ is not only a solution for a painful history that humans went through, but it is an all-knowing solution to horrific problems from which humans suffer, like hunger, war, hate, violence and slavery. This is the teaching of Christ, and this is why I am Christian. Matthew 5:44. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you, and persecute you. The Bible provides laws on how to deal with cases concerning slaves. As a matter of fact, these laws protected the slave. Exodus 21:20. If a man strikes his male or female slave with a rod and he dies at his hand, he shall be punished. The Bible provides every reason to free the slave, including offenses such as the master breaking the slave's tooth. This means, if you break my tooth, I am free. Exodus 21:26-27. 26. If a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant, and destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye. 27. And if he knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he shall let him go free for the sake of his tooth. The Bible even orders the protection of the slave who runs from his master, seeking freedom. Deuteronomy 23:15. You shall not hand over to his master a slave who has escaped from his master to you. If the slave owner beats his slave to death, he will be punished for his crime. Exodus 21:20. If a man strikes his male or female slave with a rod and he dies at his hand, he shall be punished. Causing the death of a slave is punishable by death in the Bible. Exodus 21:12. He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. In the old days, when a man became destitute, he could sell himself as a slave. The Bible also provided protection for such a man. Leviticus 25:39-43. If a countryman of yours becomes so poor with regard to you that he sells himself to you, you shall not subject him to a slave service. He shall be with you as a hired man, as if he were a sojourner. He shall serve with you until the year of Jubilee. He shall then go out from you, he and his sons with him, and shall go back to his family, that he may return to the property of his forefathers. For they are my servants whom I brought out from the land of Egypt. They are not to be sold in a slave sale. You shall not rule over him with severity, but are to revere your God. The Bible also warns against slave abuse, and whoever commits such a crime will be punished for it. The Bible even encourages familial love towards slaves. Proverbs 29:21. He who pampers his slave from childhood will in the end find him to be a son. Slavery was and is a part of human tragedy. The Jewish nation herself was enslaved by both whites, Babylonians, and Africans, Egyptian. This tells us that slavery was not a crime against color but a crime against other nations. Whites enslaved whites, blacks enslaved blacks, and blacks and whites enslaved blacks and whites. In the Bible, we find Exodus 21:16, which many do not like to mention. He who kidnaps a man, whether he sells him or he is found in his possession, shall surely be put to death. This means that it is a crime to kidnap a person to own or sell as a slave. The punishment of death is so clearly stated, but was that enough to stop slavery? For sure it wasn't, because the greed of man is endless. We can see that the Bible always works in one direction, which is to make humans more human, as illustrated in 1 Timothy 6:1-2. All who are under the yoke as slaves are to regard their own masters as worthy of all honor, so that the name of God and our doctrine will not be spoken against. Those who have believers as their masters must not be disrespectful to them. because they are brethren, but must serve them all the more, because those who partake of the benefit are believers and beloved. Teach and preach these principles. Those who hate Christianity try to use the same verse to point out that the Bible is ordering Christians to be good slaves. On the contrary, it is clear that the verse is calling the master and the slave as brothers, as equals. It is telling them to be good to each other. This is what Christ's mission is all about, peace and love. It is totally against fighting. Some people argue, if the white man is a Christian, then why does he enslave others? The simple answer is greed. It is the same reason that made the Africans enslave their fellow Africans and the Israelites. We need to remember that change in humans goes at a very slow pace, and that's why slavery of all kinds still exists today. Not much has changed. The Bible has said over and over again, that to God, we are all equal. We are all His children. In Galatians 3:28, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free man, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Again in Colossians 3:11, a renewal in which there is no distinction between Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave and freeman, but Christ is all, and in all. Christ also spoke about the rich who are ungodly. Matthew 19:24. And again I say unto you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. As we all know, Muslims always try to fool African Americans into believing that Islam is the only religion that is free of prejudice. Muslims are exactly the kinds of people described in Matthew 23:24. Ye blind guides, which strain at a gnat, and swallow a camel. Now we will see how slavery works in Islam. Slavery and Islam. The source of slavery in Islam. 1. War against non-Muslims. Christians, Jews, and infidels like Safia and Jariya whom Muhammad enslaved after killing their entire tribe. 2. Gifts, as in the case of Maria the Copt. She was sent as a gift, along with her cousins, to Muhammad, and he accepted them. 3. Buying and selling. Muhammad sold and bought slaves. 4. Progeny. The son of a slave is a slave. 5. A form of punishment. The son of a free woman who commits adultery automatically becomes a slave. Muhammad ordered that newborn sons that result from a woman's adulterous relationship will automatically become a slave. 6. Inheritance. Out of thousands, a few examples are enough to prove these points. Slavery from war. Sahih al-Bukhari, Volume 3, Book 46, Hadith 717. The Prophet of Allah did unexpectedly attack the tribe of Al-Mustaliq short of any warning as they were unconcerned and while they were busy watering their animals. Their fighting men were killed, and their women and children were taken as slaves. The Prophet got Uriah, the daughter of Mustaliq tribe leader. On that day. Book of Adwa al-Bayya, Volume 3, Number 387. The reason to own humans as slaves is if Allah gives victory to those who sacrifice their money and their force to fight the kafir, infidels, so if the word of Allah gives victory He, Allah, makes them, the enemy, their slaves except if the leader chooses to accept ransom for them. After Muhammad defeated his enemies, he enslaved them and forced them to fight for him. He used their strong bodies to win him victory in war. If the slave showed skill and leadership in fighting, Muhammad made him lead the war against the free peoples. Ironically, although the slave warrior was given an honorable position in Muhammad's army, he remained a slave. In a story found in the Book of Fath al-Bari fi Sharh Sahih al-Bukhari, p. 131, some of the white Arab men got upset when they heard that Bilal, the Ethiopian, would lead them. When they approached Muhammad, Abu Zar, who spoke for the group, said, I refuse to obey a black slave. Muhammad's answer is found in Sahih al-Bukhari, Book 11, Hadith 662. The Prophet said, consider and take orders from your leader, even if he is an Ethiopian whose head is like a raisin were made to you a leader. Book of Sahih of Abu Dawud, Hadith 2158 and the Hadith approved by the Book of Al-Alabi, Sahih Abu Dawud, number 1890. The Prophet said that it is not lawful for a Muslim to have sex with a slave woman until he is sure she is not pregnant. However, Muhammad, as always, said things he did not mean. In the same day that he slaughtered the entire tribe of Khaybar, Muhammad himself raped their women, including Safiya. She was a young wife whose husband was killed in the slaughter. Muhammad didn't wait to find out first if Safiya was pregnant before he raped her. Attack on the tribe of Khaybar, Jewish tribe. Book of Al-Maghazi by Al-Waqidi, p. 708. Abu Ayyub spent his night standing guard next to the tent of the Prophet holding his sword. When the morning came, the Prophet came out, so he said, Allah is Akbar. Muhammad said to him, What is up, Abu Ayyub? Abu Ayyub answered, O Apostle of Allah, you slept with this slave, Safiya, and you just killed her father and brothers and her husband and all of her tribe, so I was afraid she might assassinate you. The Prophet laughed and said, I will return this favor to you. The same story can be found in book entitled Zad al-Ma'ad fi Hudaka al-Ibad, printing 1198, publisher Dar al-Risalah, chapter of attacking the tribe of Khaybar. Muslims in the West like to quote a hadith where Umar al-Khattab is claimed to have said, how can you enslave people when their mothers gave birth to them as free people? This narrative is, in fact, true. However, it is reported only for the sole purpose of deceiving the listener. We can easily show how the report does not represent any truth about Islam's stance on slavery. The real context of the story centers on the antagonism between Umar ibn al-Khattab and Amr ibn al-As. When al-Khattab asked the question quoted above, he was not admonishing al-As for having slaves, instead, he was trying to humiliate al-As while making himself look morally superior over al-As. Al-As said that he hated slavery, so al-Khattab was forcing him to explain why he did not have any problem accepting all the verses in the Qur'an regarding slavery. Al-As himself owned thousands of slaves. He raped and beat his slaves. And he never freed any of his slaves. Al-Khattab's question was not a question meant to condemn slavery. It was a question meant to attack and expose his deeply hated enemy as a hypocrite. It is interesting to note that if al-Khattab's question was meant to condemn slavery, wouldn't that mean that he thought Muhammad was a bad man, since Muhammad himself owned slaves and gladly accepted men and women slaves, not only as spoils of war, but also as gifts? The claim that al-Khattab's popularly quoted question is an example of Islam's stance against slavery is a joke. When put in its proper context, the question is actually nothing but an expression of hate and jealousy between two men. The narrative itself has nothing to do with freeing slaves. By the way, Muhammad never gave orders and conditions when to free a slave. When I say never, I mean never. I challenge any Muslim to quote one verse ordering Muslims to free their slaves. Freeing a slave was up to the owner to do or not do. It is optional. In fact, he re-enslaved a freed slave. Sahih al-Bukhari, Book 85, Hadith 80, also. See Sahih al-Bukhari, Book 41, Hadith 598. An adult male human from the Azar gave his youth slave his freedom, and let his slave go free, and he did not have any other property. This news arrived at Allah's messenger. Moreover, the messenger said, who will buy that slave from me? So Nu'aym bin Abdallah al-Naham bought him for 800 dirhams. Jabir added, it was a Coptic slave who passed away that year. This hadith shows how Muhammad was in full control of slavery as a business. He could even do things against anyone's will. When a man freed his slave, Muhammad put the slave back into slavery and made money out of him. At the same time, he showed no mercy toward the poor slave who was waiting all his life to be freed. Also see that the slave died after he was sold again. I would not be surprised if this was because of depression. What would Muhammad lose if? Be surprised if this was because of depression. What would Muhammad lose if he had let the man go? He did not even own the man, but money was Muhammad's God. The slave owner was poor, and his only property was his slave, but he still chose to free his slave. Why did Muhammad cancel the slave's emancipation? He knew that if everybody started freeing their slaves, then the slave market could not continue to thrive. Sahih al-Bukhari, Book 8, Volume 82, Hadith 822. Reported by Abu Hurairah. The opinion of Allah's Messenger was requested when the unmarried slave girl was found guilty of unlawful intercourse. On that ground, he responded, if she performs illegitimate sexual intercourse, then scourge her 50 belts, and if she engages unlawful sexual intercourse another time, after that lash her 50 belts, and if she commits unlawful sexual intercourse for the third time, after that, lash her 50 belts and trades her for the price of her tie. By making such a rule, her owner could rape her at the same time, but she cannot have unlawful sexual intercourse. Based on this, if the slave is sick of her master, she is forced now to do such behavior, so she might get out of that master's home to be with a new master.